The Grand Council chamber of the Ethelgardian High Synod was not merely a room. It was a testament to the concept of eternity, a hollowed-out geode of obsidian and crystalline lattice buried deep within the crust of a wandering moon. The air here was kept deliberately thin, cold, and scented with the burning resin of mental clarity, a distinct olfactory trigger that was supposed to sharpen the minds of the galaxy's supreme overseers. Light did not flood this space. It bled into it, filtering through the semi-translucent rock above, casting long, bruised shadows of indigo and violet that danced across the faces of the assembled delegates. There were no chairs, only floating podiums of anti-gravitic stone, arranged in a descending spiral that mimicked the shape of the great galactic arm they claimed to rule. At the very center of the pit, suspended in a magnetic field, was the hollow matrix, a swirling representation of known space, glittering with the lights of 1,000 subjugated systems and the dark voids of the unexplored frontiers. High Arbiter Thrax, a being of chitinous plates and weary, roomy eyes that had seen star systems born and extinguished, adjusted the ceremonial robes that draped his hulking frame. He felt the weight of his centuries today, a physical pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with the moon's gravity and everything to do with the creeping stagnation of his empire. The Ethelgardian hegemony was the apex predator of political entities, a vast bureaucracy that had swallowed smaller civilizations for eons, digesting their technologies and cultures until everything was uniform, predictable, and safe. Yet in the silence of the chamber, Thrax felt a tremor of unease. The debates had grown stale. The threats were minor. The galaxy had become a garden, manicured and trimmed, and in that perfection, Thrax sensed the rot of complacency. He looked across the spiral to the podium of War Marshal Vrex, a creature of muscle and aggression, whose mandibles twitched with a perpetual desire for conflict that no longer existed. Vrex was staring at the hollow matrix with disdain, his 4 arms crossed over his chest, waiting for a crisis that would justify his immense fleets. The silence of the chamber was shattered not by a shout, but by the low, resonant hum of the priority data stream. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the skull, a demand for attention that could not be ignored. The hollow matrix flickered, the gold and blue lights of the hegemony's territories dimming to be replaced by a pulsing, angry crimson blot located in the far reaches of the periphery, in a sector known as the abyssal rift of the Cygnus Null Zone. This was dead space. It was a graveyard of physics, a region where gravity wells collapsed in upon themselves, and radiation storms flayed the hulls of even the most shielded dreadnoughts. No ship went there. No ship that went there ever returned. It was the edge of the map, the terrifying drop-off into the unknown that the hegemony used as a cautionary tale for upstart races who sought to explore beyond the sanctioned borders. "Report," Thrax commanded, his voice a dry rasp that echoed off the obsidian walls. He did not need to shout. The acoustics of the chamber carried a whisper to the highest tiers. The science-cast leader, a slender, translucent-skinned being named Lyra, tapped furiously at the controls of her podium, her large, dark eyes widening as the data cascaded before her. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the interface, a gesture of uncertainty that sent a ripple of murmurs through the assembly. Uncertainty was rare among the science-cast. They dealt in absolutes, in calculated probabilities and immutable laws. For Lyra to hesitate meant that the data was not merely alarming, it was impossible. "High Arbiter," Lyra began, her voice trembling slightly, modulated by the translation collar around her throat. "The deep-range sensors in the Cygnus sector have picked up a gravitational anomaly. It is immense. The displacement reads are equivalent to a small moon or a catastrophic planetary breakup, but the signature is coherent. It is not natural debris. It is not a rogue asteroid or a collapsing star. The energy output matches the harmonic frequency of a warp drive, but the scale is wrong. It is exponentially higher than anything in our database. It violates the standard curve of mass-to-energy conversion." Vrex leaned forward, his podium drifting closer to the center, his interest peaked for the first time in cycles. "A weapon," he growled, the sub-vocalizers in his throat adding a menacing bass to the question. "A dreadnought from a rival empire, the Krill, the Dominion of Glass." "No," Lyra said, shaking her head, her movements jerky with confusion. "The spectral analysis of the hull alloy, the radioactive decay dating on the outer shell. It matches a known profile, but it makes no sense. The computer insists on a 99.9% probability match, but I have flagged it as a system error because the ship it identifies ceased to exist 40 standard cycles ago." Thrax felt a cold chill settle in his gut, a sensation he had not felt since the rebellion of the Seven Suns. "Identify the vessel, Lyra. Do not hide behind probabilities." Lyra swallowed hard, the bioluminescence under her skin pulsing with anxiety. "The signature matches the Terran vessel Odyssey, the human exploration ship, the one that vanished during their first attempt to map the Null Zone." A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the High Synod. The humans. The word itself tasted like ash in Thrax's mouth. They were a minor client species, a frantic, short-lived race of bipeds who had stumbled into the galactic community with primitive warp drives and a desperate need for validation. They were tolerated barely. They served as laborers, engineers for hazardous environments, and occasionally as diplomats to the more irrational fringe worlds because they possessed a strange, illogical empathy. But they were weak. Their ships were blocky, utilitarian things, held together by chemical rockets and hope. The Odyssey had been their pride, their flagship of exploration, a vessel they had poured their planetary resources into. When it had sent a distress signal from the edge of the Null Zone 40 cycles ago, the hegemony had received it. Thrax remembered the moment clearly. He had been the one to deny the rescue mission. The risk to hegemony assets was deemed too high for the sake of a single, primitive ship. They had let the humans burn or suffocate or be crushed by the gravity tides. It was a calculated political decision, forgotten by the Empire but clearly not forgotten by the universe. "The Odyssey was a light cruiser," Vrex said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "A scrap heap. You said this anomaly has the displacement of a moon. You said the energy output violates physics. How can a dead human ship return as a Titan?" "I do not know," Lyra whispered. "But it is moving. It is not drifting. It is under power, and it is heading directly for the grid. It is on a trajectory for the High Synod." The atmosphere in the chamber shifted instantly from boredom to panic. The grid was the defense network surrounding the capital moon, a lattice of orbital fortresses and weapon platforms that could sterilize a planet's surface in minutes. For a vessel to approach the grid was an act of war. For a vessel to approach the grid from the Null Zone, carrying the ghost of a betrayed ally, was a nightmare made manifest. Thrax looked at the hollow matrix. The red dot was moving with terrifying speed, eating the light years that separated the Null Zone from the core worlds. It was not using standard warp lanes. It was plowing through normal space at relativistic speeds, pushing a bow wave of distorted spacetime ahead of it that disrupted sensors across half the sector. "Mobilize the home fleet," Thrax ordered, his voice steady despite the racing of his hearts. "War Marshal Vrex, assume command of the orbital defenses. If this is a human trick, if they have salvaged ancient technology or made a pact with some pirate coalition, we will crush them. We showed them mercy by allowing them into our space. We will show them justice if they threaten our peace." Vrex was already tapping commands into his tactical display, a predatory grin splitting his mandibles. "With pleasure, Arbiter. I have long said the humans were a variable we should have eliminated. They are too unpredictable, too emotional. If this is their attempt at revenge, it will be the shortest war in history." But as the orders went out, as the massive dreadnoughts of the hegemony began to power their engines and the orbital platforms rotated their dark matter cannons toward the vector of approach, Thrax could not shake the feeling that they were the ones being underestimated. The humans he knew were frantic, loud, and eager to please. They were children in a galaxy of adults, but 40 cycles in the dark, 40 cycles in the silence of the Null Zone. That could change a species. It could strip away the frivolity and leave something else behind. Something hard, something cold. He watched the red dot on the matrix, and for the first time in centuries, the High Arbiter of the Ethelgardian hegemony felt the primal, animalistic urge to hide. The hours that followed were a blur of escalating tension. The chamber remained sealed, the delegates locked in a vigil of fear as the anomaly drew closer. Screens along the walls displayed the live feeds from the long-range optical telescopes. At first, it was just a smudge of light, a distortion against the starfield. Then, as it crossed the boundary of the outer system, the resolution cleared. Gasps of horror and awe rippled through the assembly. The ship, if it could still be called that, was monstrous. It bore no resemblance to the sleek, geometric designs of the hegemony, nor the block. Industrial aesthetic of the original human fleet. It was an amalgamation of nightmares and miracles. The core of the vessel appeared to be the original Odyssey, but it was encased in layers of accretion, vast plates of dark, shifting material that looked like frozen smoke or solidified void. It had grown. It had scavenged. There were jagged spires rising from its hull that crackled with arcs of lightning, and massive, glowing veins of energy that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the surface. It looked less like a machine built in a shipyard and more like a celestial body that had been forged in the heart of a dying star. It was scarred, pitted, and ancient, yet it moved with a grace that defied its bulk. It did not have engines in the traditional sense. Instead, the space behind it simply ceased to be, propelling the vessel forward on a wave of nothingness. "It is hailing us," the communications officer announced, his voice cracking. "Broadband transmission, all frequencies, it is overriding our encryption." "Block it," Vrex snapped. "Prepare firing solutions, they are within range of the outer markers." I cannot block it, Marshal," the officer stammered. "The signal is omnipresent. It is coming from the ship, but it is also resonating from within our own systems. They have bypassed the firewalls." Suddenly, the hollow matrix dissolved. The map of the galaxy vanished, replaced by a single image floating in the center of the chamber. It was a human face, but not the soft, eager faces the hegemony was used to. This face was gaunt, the skin pale and tight against the skull, the eyes burning with an intensity that looked like madness tempered by absolute discipline. The human wore a uniform that was unrecognizable, a dark matte material that seemed to absorb the light, adorned with no metals, only a single, simple insignia of a torch held against the darkness. Behind him, the bridge of the ship was visible, a cavernous space of shadows and floating displays, manned by crew members who moved with eerie, synchronized silence. "This is Admiral Vance of the USC Revenant," the figure spoke. The voice was calm, terrifyingly so. It lacked the erratic cadence of human speech. It was a flat, resonant baritone that carried the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. "We request permission to enter high orbit. We have returned." Thrax stepped forward, his hands gripping the edges of his podium. "You are identified as the Odyssey," he said, trying to project authority. "You are a ghost human. You were lost in the null zone. Why have you returned in a warship? Why do you violate the borders of the High Synod with weapons charged?" The image of Admiral Vance did not blink. "The Odyssey is dead," he replied. "We are what survived, and we do not have weapons charged, High Arbiter. If we wish to engage you, your grid would already be dust. We are here to talk. We have seen what lies beyond the veil, and we have brought something back. Stand down your fleets. Do not make a mistake that will cost you your civilization." Vrex slammed his fist onto his console. "Arrogance, you threaten the hegemony, you a scavenger in a corpse ship. All batteries, fire at will, vaporize that abomination." "Wait," Thrax shouted, but the order had been given. The paranoia of the military caste had overridden the caution of the diplomats. On the screens, the orbital defense grid lit up. Beams of coherent antimatter, plasma torpedoes, and singularity drivers, the pinnacle of galactic warfare, streaked toward the lone human vessel. The sky above the capital moon turned white with the intensity of the barrage. It was enough firepower to crack a planet to its core. The delegates shielded their eyes, expecting the flash of the destruction, the debris field that would be all that remained of the human upstarts. But the flash never came. As the energy beams struck the Revenant, they didn't detonate. They didn't burn. They splashed. The dark, shifting hull of the human ship seemed to ripple, absorbing the energy like water absorbing a stone. The plasma torpedoes dissolved upon contact, their thermal energy sucked into the glowing veins that ran along the ship's flank. The singularity drivers, capable of tearing holes in reality, merely caused the ship to shimmer, as if it existed in a phase of matter that the weapons could not touch. The barrage lasted for 20 seconds of continuous fire. When it ceased, the Revenant was still there. It hadn't slowed down. It hadn't raised shields. It had simply taken the hit and fed upon it. The violet energy coursing through its hull pulsed brighter, charged by the hegemony's own aggression. "Energy absorption at 100%, Lyra whispered, her voice amplified by the stunned silence of the room. They converted the attack. They used the kinetic and thermal energy to recharge their capacitors. That technology. It shouldn't exist. It defies entropy." On the holographic display, Admiral Vance sighed. It was a human sound, one of disappointment, like a parent watching a child break a toy. "We told you," he said. "We are not here to fight. We are beyond that. Now lower your grid or we will lower it for you. We have little time and the message we carry is heavier than your pride." Thrax looked at Vrex. The War Marshal was trembling, his mandibles slack. The foundation of his world, the absolute superiority of hegemony firepower, had just been shattered in 20 seconds. Thrax realized then that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted not just today, but 40 years ago in the dark, while the hegemony slept. "Stand down," Thrax whispered. Then louder, "Stand down, all forces cease fire, lower the grid, allow the vessel to orbit." The tension in the chamber was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of fear and curiosity. The Revenant slid into high orbit, its massive shadow falling across the capital city below, blocking out the sun. It hung there, a dark monolith, silent and observing. Shuttle bays opened along its flank, and a single small transport craft descended. It was not a sleek diplomat's yacht. It was a dropship, armored and scarred, looking like it had flown through hell. Thrax, Vrex, and a delegation of the High Synod met the humans in the grand hangar. The airlock cycled, steam hissing as the pressure equalized. The ramp descended. Thrax expected a platoon of soldiers. He expected powered armor and weapons. Instead, 5 humans walked down the ramp. They wore simple, dark gray uniforms. No armor, no visible weapons. They moved with a synchronized fluidity that was unnerving. They stopped 10 paces from the alien delegation. Admiral Vance was in the lead. Up close, he looked even more haunting. His skin had a faint metallic sheen, as if he had been exposed to exotic radiation for so long that it had become part of his biology. His eyes were not just intense, they were old. They held the look of someone who had stared into the abyss and forced the abyss to blink. "High Arbiter," Vance said, inclining his head slightly. A gesture of politeness, not submission. "Admiral," Thrax replied, fighting the urge to step back. "You survived the null zone. You survived the impossible, the hegemony. Regrets the loss of your original vessel. We assumed rescue was impossible." "It was impossible," Vance said. "By your standards and by ours at the time, we drifted for 3 years. Systems failed. Life support failed. We were dying. We were freezing in the dark. We called out to you. We called out to Earth. No one answered, so we stopped calling out and we started listening." "Listening to what?" Lyra asked, stepping forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. Vance looked at her. "To the noise between the stars. The null zone isn't empty, science leader. It is a scrapyard, a dumping ground. Ancient civilizations, ones that ruled this galaxy a billion years before your ancestors crawled out of the ocean, they threw their mistakes into the null zone. Dead gods, rogue AIs, weapons that could eat stars. We found them. We found a graveyard of titans." He paused, looking around the pristine, sterile hangar of the hegemony station. "We were scavengers. We took the hull of a dead dreadnought from a race that hasn't existed for eons and welded it to our frame. We took a singularity drive from a derelict worldship. We integrated our biology with the systems because our hands were too slow to operate them. We became the ship. We didn't come back stronger because we wanted to conquer you. We came back because we had to survive." "If you do not seek conquest," Vrex growled, regaining some of his composure, "then why return with such a display? Why humiliate the fleet? You could have sent a message." "We tried," a woman next to Vance said. She was tall, her hair white as snow, her face marked by silver circuitry tracing her jawline. "We sent signals for a decade. Your sensors are tuned to the frequencies of the living. You ignore the frequencies of the dead. We had to knock on your door loud enough for you to hear." Vance stepped closer to Thrax. "We didn't come back for you, Arbiter. We didn't come back for Earth, though we have already deployed a shield fleet to protect it. We came back because the graveyard is waking up." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. "What do you mean?" Thrax asked. "The null zone," Vance explained, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the vast hangar. "It wasn't just a dump, it was a prison, the things in there. The things we scavenged to survive. They were locked away for a reason. When we activated the ancient drives, when we pulled the Revenant from the muck, we broke the seal. We triggered a signal, a wake-up call." Vance tapped a device on his wrist, and a holographic projection sprang to life between them. It showed the galaxy, but from a perspective none of them had seen before, top-down, encompassing the dark halo that surrounded the Galactic D. "Isg. There is a fleet approaching," Vance said. "Not a fleet of ships, a fleet of consumers, biological machines. Von Neumann swarms that eat matter to replicate. They have been sleeping in the dark space between galaxies, waiting for a signal that high-energy technology had re-emerged in this sector. Our return was that signal. We are the bell that rang in the dinner hall." Lyra gasped. "The great filter," she whispered. "The theoretical limit to civilization. You are saying it is real, that it is coming." "It is already here," Vance said. "They will be at the edge of hegemony space in 3 standard days. Your fleet is impressive, Marshal Vrex, against pirates and rebels. Against this, you are throwing stones at a tidal wave. Your weapons rely on thermal expansion and kinetic impact. The swarm feeds on that. You saw how we absorbed your fire. We learned that from them. We reverse-engineered the armor of the enemy. Thrax felt his legs weaken. The political squabbles, the border disputes, the pride of the Empire, it all evaporated in an instant. "Then we are doomed," he said softly. "If you, with your godship, are running, what hope do we have?" Vance smiled, a grim, humorless expression. "We aren't running, Arbiter. We came back to draw the line. The Revenant is not alone. We built others in the dark. We have a fleet of 40 ships, each one a monster stitched together from the corpses of the past. We are the shield, but we need you to be the sword." "Us?" Vrex asked, confused. "You said our weapons are useless." "Your energy weapons are useless," Vance corrected. "But you have resources, you have mass, you have trillions of lives and industrial capacity. We have the tech, but we don't have the numbers. We need you to retool your shipyards. We need you to produce kinetic drivers, railguns, mass drivers, old-school projectile weapons. The swarm shields adapt to energy, but they crack under brute physical force. We need you to become primitive again. We need the cold logic of the hegemony to organize a galactic defense while we hold the line." Thrax looked at the human. He saw the exhaustion in Vance's eyes. This was not a conqueror. This was a man who had held the weight of the universe on his shoulders for 40 years and was finally asking for help. The humans had been underestimated, dismissed, and left to die, and yet they had returned not with vengeance but with salvation. They were calm because they had no energy left for panic. They were ethical because they knew the cost of life. They were powerful because they had to be. "We dismissed you," Thrax said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "We left you to die in the dark. Why save us? Why not let the swarm take us and build your own empire on the ashes?" Vance looked up at the ceiling of the hangar toward the unseen stars. "Because in the dark," he said softly, "you learn that the only thing that matters is the light next to you. It doesn't matter if that light is human or Ethel Guardian or Krill. The cold is the enemy. The silence is the enemy. We are all just travelers huddled around the same fire. We won't let the fire go out." He extended a hand. It was a human gesture, archaic and intimate. Thrax hesitated only for a moment before extending his own clawed hand to grasp it. The grip was strong, solid, and warm. "Teach us," Thrax said. "Show us how to fight the dark." The following days were a transformation the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. The arrival of the Revenant had shattered the social order, but the impending threat united the fractured castes. The High Synod became a war room, but not for a war of conquest. It was a war for survival. Human engineers, pale and scarred from their time in the void, worked side by side with Ethel Guardian scientists. They ripped the elegant, artistic energy cannons off the hulls of the dreadnoughts and replaced them with ugly, massive railguns that fired solid slugs of tungsten and depleted uranium. The aesthetics of the hegemony fleet were ruined. The ships looked lopsided, brutal, and industrial, but they looked dangerous. The humans shared their star charts of the null zone. They opened their databases, revealing the history of the Builders, the race that had created the swarm and then perished by its hand. The data was horrifying. It spoke of a cycle of destruction that occurred every 50,000 years. The galaxy was a farm, and harvest time had come. But the humans had introduced a new variable, resilience, the stubborn refusal to die. When the swarm arrived, it did not come as a fleet of ships, but as a cloud. A living nebula of biomechanical squids, each the size of a city, blotting out the stars. They blocked the sensors. They screamed across the psychic bands, a chorus of hunger that drove telepaths on the station to madness. They descended upon the outer colonies like a plague of locusts. But waiting for them was the wall. The Revenant and its sister ships, the Wraith. The Poltergeist, the Lazarus, stood in the vanguard. They were terrifying to behold. They activated their scavenger drives, creating gravity wells that crushed the smaller swarm entities instantly. They unleashed the screams of the void, a weaponized sonic resonance they had discovered in the deep, which shattered the crystalline carapaces of the enemy. And behind them, the hegemony fleet opened fire. Millions of tons of metal, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, slammed into the biological tide. There were no elegant beams of light. There was only the brutal physics of impact. The swarm, adapted to absorb lasers and plasma, had no defense against being punched in the face by a solid slug. They burst, they shattered, they died. The battle lasted for weeks. The sky above the capital moon burned with the debris of re-entering corpses. War Marshal Vrex fought with a savagery that became legend, his ship fighting wing to wing with the Revenant. For the first time, the alien and the human were not master and client, but brothers in arms. In the final hours of the conflict, the swarm attempted to merge to form a world eater, a massive bioform capable of consuming the moon itself. It dwarfed the Revenant. It was a monstrosity of flesh and metal, a mountain of teeth and hunger. "It's too big," Vrex shouted over the comms. "Our rounds are just scratching the surface. It's regenerating faster than we can kill it." "Pull back," Vance's voice came over the channel, calm as ever. "All hegemony forces retreat to the dark side of the moon. We are going to close the door." "What are you doing?" Thrax asked from the command center. "The drive core of the Revenant," Vance explained. "It's a singularity container. We scavenged it from a collapsed star. If we overload it, we can create a momentary event horizon, a mini black hole. It will pull the World Eater in. It will crush it into infinite density." "That will destroy you," Thrax said, his voice trembling. "You will be pulled in as well. You cannot survive a singularity." There was a pause on the line. "We died 40 years ago, Arbiter. We are just living on borrowed time. This is a good way to spend it." "No," Lyra cried out. "There must be another way. You carry the knowledge of the ancients. You are the bridge." "The data is already uploaded to your servers," Vance said. "The bridge is built. Now you have to walk across it. Remember us. Remember that humans don't break. We just change." The Revenant broke formation. It didn't fire its weapons. It simply accelerated, its engines flaring with a blinding violet light. It flew directly into the maw of the World Eater. For a moment there was silence. Then the center of the swarm beast imploded, space twisted, light bent. A sphere of absolute darkness expanded, silently swallowing the monster, swallowing the debris, swallowing the Revenant. It hung there for a heartbeat, a hole in the universe, before collapsing in a flash of Hawking radiation that outshone the local star. The shockwave cleared the system of the remaining swarm. The sky was empty. The threat was gone. Silence returned to the Grand Council chamber, but it was not the silence of stagnation. It was the silence of mourning and of awe. Thrax stood at the viewing port, looking out at the space where the Revenant had been. The hegemony had survived. The galaxy was safe, but the world had changed. The humans were no longer the minor client race. They were the saviors. They were the legends. In the aftermath, the hegemony dissolved the client-state accords. Humanity was granted a seat on the High Synod, not as a member, but as a protector. The surviving human ships, the Lazarus and the Wraith, remained as the guardians of the peace. But the biggest twist was found in the data package Vance had left behind. Lyra stood before the council, weeks later, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" Thrax asked. "Is there another swarm?" "No," Lyra said. "I have decoded the final logs of the Odyssey, the logs from before they found the scavenger tech, the logs from when they were freezing in the dark." She projected the text onto the air. It was a transcript of the crew's final vote. "They didn't just survive by luck," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "They found the ancient shipyard, yes, but the shipyard required a biological interface to activate. It required a sacrifice, a consciousness to merge with the AI to wake the machines." Thrax read the logs. The crew of the Odyssey hadn't just piloted the Revenant. "The ship," Thrax whispered, horror and wonder warring in his mind. "The ship was them." "Admiral Vance," Lyra continued, tears forming in her large eyes. "He wasn't just a man in a suit. His physical body was a construct. His consciousness, the consciousness of the entire crew, was uploaded into the ship's neural network. They merged their minds to become the operating system. They sacrificed their humanity to become the weapon that would salve." "Eos." Thrax looked out at the stars. He realized now why Vance had seemed so calm, so distant. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a hive mind of 300 souls bound together by duty and love, piloting a shell of metal and magic. They had ceased to be individuals 40 years ago. They had become the concept of humanity, the refusal to give up, the willingness to sacrifice, the endurance of the spirit. "They were dead," Thrax said softly, "the dead ship that came back. And in doing so," Vrex added, his voice low with reverence, "they showed us what it truly means to be alive." The galaxy was vast and full of terrors. The dark was deep and cold. But as Thrax looked at the new constellation of human warships patrolling the perimeter, he knew they would be all right. The fire would not go out, for the humans had become the fire and they burned brighter than any star. The chamber, once a place of stagnant politics, was now a temple to a new philosophy. On the central podium, where the hollow matrix once displayed the territories of the Empire, a new statue was being erected. It was not of a Krellian or an Ethel Guardian. It was a simple figure forged from the scrap metal of the battle, a human holding a torch against the void. And carved into the base, in the universal language of the Synod, were the final words of Admiral Vance. "We are the wall, we are the shield, and we are still here." Deep in the null zone, amidst the wreckage of the ancient shipyard, a single light flickered to life on a dormant console. A backup routine, a fragment of code left behind. System reboot initiated. Entity Vance Beta. Status online. Objective build more. The screen pulsed in the darkness. The Revenant was gone, but the ghost was still in the machine, and humanity had a lot of work to do. Thrax turned away from the window, his heart's beating with a new purpose. The story wasn't over, it had just begun. The weeks turned into months, and the months into cycles. The reconstruction of the hegemony was painful but necessary. The psychological impact of the Revenant event had fundamentally altered the alien psyche. No longer did the Ethel Guardians look inward with arrogance, they looked outward with vigilance. The Krellian war marshals, once obsessed with honor duels and territory, now studied human tactical manuals with the fervor of religious scholars. They learned about asymmetric warfare, guerrilla logistics, and the terrifying human concept of spite. Science leader Lyra became the primary liaison to the human remnant. She spent her days aboard the USC Lazarus, the sister ship to the Revenant. It was commanded by Captain Valerius, a woman who, like Vance, possessed that unsettling metallic calm. Lyra was trying to understand the biofusion technology, but more than that, she was trying to understand the mind behind it. "You speak as one," Lyra observed one day as she watched Valerius interface with the ship's navigation core. The captain's hands were buried in a pool of nanite fluid, her eyes rolled back, twitching with rapid data ingestion. "When you speak to me, is it Valerius, or is it the crew?" Valerius pulled her hands free, the silver liquid dripping from her fingers and retracting back into the console. She wiped them on a rag, a mundane action that contrasted sharply with the eldritch technology. "It is mostly Valerius," she said, "but the others are there, like voices in a crowded room. When the pressure is high, we harmonize. When it is quiet, we drift apart." "Is it lonely?" Lyra asked. "No," Valerius smiled. "It is the opposite of lonely. It is total empathy. I know when Engineer Halloway is thinking about his daughter who died before we left Earth. I feel his grief as my own. I know when Lieutenant Chen is afraid. We share the load. That is why we are strong. A single mind breaks under the pressure of the null zone. 1,000 minds woven together, we bend, but we do not break." Lyra nodded, recording the insight. "The High Synod has voted," she said. "We are establishing a permanent memorial for the Revenant, and we are petitioning to send a fleet to Earth, not to conquer, to upgrade. If the swarm returns, your homeworld must be ready." Valerius's expression hardened slightly. "Earth is complicated. We left it a long time ago. They were divided then. Petty nations fighting over scraps of land. If you go there with this technology, you might destroy them faster than the swarm could." "Then what do you suggest?" "We go together," Valerius said. "We act as the filter. We give them what they can handle. Solar power, medical nanites, but the weapons, the singularity drives, no, we keep those. We are the parents now, Lyra, and Earth is still in the cradle." The wisdom of the statement struck Lyra. The humans who had left had evolved beyond their kin. They were a new species forged in the dark, Homo stellaris. Meanwhile, on the High Council station, Thrax was dealing with a new kind of problem. The unity brought by the war was beginning to fray, not into conflict, but into a strange cultural bleed. Young Ethel Guardians were adopting human mannerisms. They were listening to the fragmented music files found in the Odyssey's database. They were asking questions about freedom and self-determination, concepts that the rigid caste system of the hegemony found uncomfortable. "The humans are a virus," Vrex grumbled one evening, though his tone lacked its former venom. He was polishing his new kinetic rail pistol, a weapon he had grown fond of. "Even when they are helpful, they are disruptive. My own broodkin asked me yesterday why we do not have votes. I told him because we have orders. He did not seem satisfied." Thrax chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "We wanted to survive, Vrex. Survival means adaptation. We cannot be what we were. The universe is too big and too dangerous for the old ways. Perhaps a little disruption is good for the blood." "Perhaps," Vrex conceded. But if I see one more cadet wearing a flight jacket, I will have them spaced. The alarm interrupted their banter. It was not the red alert of the swarm. It was a priority diplomatic channel. Arbiter, the comms officer, called out. We are receiving a signal from the null zone. Thrax froze. The swarm. No, sir, it's encoded in the same format as the Revenant, but the signature is different. It's older. Put it on screen. The image that appeared was not a human face. It was a construct of geometric light, a rotating pyramid of pure energy. But the voice that spoke was undeniably human. This is the USC Eternity, the voice boomed. Identify yourselves. Thrax looked at Vrex, then at the screen. This is High Arbiter Thrax of the Hegemony. We are allies of Admiral Vance and the Revenant. Vance, the voice seemed to ripple with surprise. The youngster, he actually made it back. Good for him. Youngster, Thrax asked, bewildered. The Revenant was lost for 40 cycles. How long have you been out there? 40 cycles, the Eternity laughed, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. We are the colony ship Horizon. We launched from Earth in the year 2150. We were lost in a wormhole accident. By our count, we have been in the null zone for 300 years. We built a civilization in the deep dark. We built cities inside the carcasses of the dead gods, and we just picked up the shockwave of a singularity event. Someone rang the dinner bell, and we came to see who was cooking. Thrax sank into his podium. The Odyssey wasn't the first. It wasn't the only one. How many of you are there? Thrax whispered. Enough, the Eternity replied. We are the Deep Fleet. We thought we were the last survivors of the galaxy. We thought the swarm had eaten everything. It is pleasant to see that the lights are still on. The sensors widened their scope. Behind the Eternity, the shadows of space detached themselves. Massive shapes, world ships, dreadnoughts that made the Revenant look like a toy. They were scarred, patched, and terrifyingly beautiful. They bore the insignias of old Earth nations, NASA, ESA, CNSA, but evolved into heraldry of neon and void steel. We are coming into dock, the Eternity stated. We need water, we need reaction mass, and we need to know who threw a black hole at the swarm. That's our kind of crazy. Thrax looked at Vrex. The War Marshal was grinning, a true, terrified, exhilarated grin. We are going to need a bigger station, Vrex said. Thrax nodded. The universe had just gotten a lot smaller and humanity had just gotten a lot bigger. The dead ships hadn't just come back. They had brought the cavalry. Open the dock, Thrax ordered, feeling a surge of hope he hadn't felt in a millennium. And get the humans some coffee. I hear they like it. As the massive fleet of the deep human remnant began its approach, blotting out the stars with their sheer numbers, Thrax realized the ultimate irony. The Hegemony had spent eons fearing what lay in the dark. They had never suspected that the thing in the dark was just a lost tribe of humans, fixing their engines, loading their guns, and waiting for the right moment to come home. The cinematic scale of the moment was not lost on the galaxy. From the observation deck, Lyra watched the arrival. She saw the designs, brutalist, efficient, unyielding. She saw the scars of battles fought in silence with no witnesses but the black holes. She opened her datapad and began a new entry in the Codex of History. Entry 1, The Return. The universe is not silent, it is holding its breath, and today humanity exhaled. The story of the Ethel Guardian hegemony ended that day. The story of the United Galactic Alliance began, and at the prow of the lead ship, unseen but felt by every telepath in the system, was a psychic projection of a human hand, giving a thumbs up. It was crude, it was ancient, it was perfect. Thrax straightened his robes. Let us go me. Our ancestors, he said, misinterpreting the timeline but capturing the spirit. And let us hope they are friendly. They are humans, Vrex replied, checking his pistol one last time. They are never friendly, but they are loyal, and right now loyal is enough. The airlock cycled, the mist cleared, and the future walked in.